PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. It's all happening in the World Chess Championship. Here's my recap of Game 12. Remember, going into this game, the challenger, Gukesh Dommaraju, leading by a point. So Ding had to try and hit back. Ding, the world champion, of course, had to try and hit back in one of these final three games. He's got white in this 12th game. Could he do it? Could the world champion hit back? C4 from Ding. G3, so the fianchetto. So he's not going crazy, and I think that's the right strategy if you want to play for a win. You don't burn your boats. There's still 3 games to go. D5, so Gukesh sets up a strong point in the centre. Bishop G2, normal development. Knight F3. And now I was anticipating Gukesh to play just a solid Bishop E7 and then we could go into a Catalan. But Gukesh played D4. Maybe he just wants to sidestep any ideas that Ding has because he's a very experienced player of the Catalan. So D4. And now this looks a little similar to the previous game where Ding was also pushing in the middle like this. And it's kind of a reverse Benoni. So it's quite an ambitious move from Gukesh, claiming more space. Knight C6 and E3. Ding hitting back in the middle, putting pressure on the D4 pawn. Bishop E7 development, D3. And Gukesh decides to exchange on E3. You can play E5 here, but white often gets play with this knight hitting this pawn, maybe the bishop coming here. Oh, there's a lot of arrows there. But he took on E3 very quickly. And this is obviously preparation, and then played E5, sort of, claiming, more central space than white. And yeah, playing very quickly, obviously preparation. And Ding consuming quite a bit of time. So, they've played 9 moves each, and Ding had an hour and 23 left, Gukesh an hour and 56. So Gukesh, the challenger, already had a half-hour time advantage. Rook E1 from Ding. So yeah, potentially putting pressure on the E5 pawn. So this is the first moment that Gukesh had a really big think, and it's not so easy to, there are lots of options here. Where do you put this bishop? One of these squares? Or do you play the knight here? Do you play rook e8? Lots of options for black. In the end, Gukesh went for h6. That means that if the bishop comes to e6, then knight g5 is prevented. And Ding thought for 17.5 minutes here. It's a really tricky position because I think Ding realises that if he gets it slightly wrong, then the whole thing can just fizzle out to a draw. For example, now he played a3 here, but if you play d4, it's actually a very tempting move because after this exchange, you can see that white's development is so much better than black's. These pieces look absolutely wonderful. But in fact, after this move, just shutting out that bishop, it's very hard for white to get any advantage. You can exchange queens, and then here's the clever move. You have to get that bishop away from the rook. And actually, there's nothing clear for white in this position. The bishops will come off the back rank, the rooks will be connected, and black is fine. Ding said he spent a long time looking at that, and I'm not surprised because that could be a very nice break for white in this position. But in the end, as I said, after 17.5 minutes, he just played a3, which, can prevent a knight coming here, so you might want to station the queen on c2. And also, of course, you might want to gain some space with b4. So a5 prevents that. h3, careful move, preventing knight g4 hitting the bishop. And Gukesh played bishop e6 after 5 minutes. I think he wanted to keep an eye on this pawn just discouraging d4, because if bishop f5, then this does actually look pretty good for white. This break, black always has to watch this break, and you can see that, yeah, there's a loose bishop here, potentially loose bishop here, and this one. Yeah, I think black could end up in trouble here with these weak squares, potentially that bishop a little bit loose as well. So that one's a bit different. So bishop e6 played, just keeping an eye on the pawn on c4, and then king h2, very patient from Ding. So he's not, you know, burning his bridges here. Rook b8. So that's a very careful move from Gukesh, but not very active. I think it might be directed against potentially queen b3 hitting this pawn, but it's really quite a passive move. But what's interesting is that Ding didn't go crazy here. Queen c2. And this is an important moment. So Gukesh played rook e8, just waiting and putting the rook to a useful square. But knight d4 had to be calculated. And Ding said he was looking at knight e4 here, and you know, white has freer pieces. In fact, in this position, knight b5 is much stronger, because if bishop c5, then white gets a really nice initiative here. This is problematic for black. Anyway, rook e8 played, knight b5, that's a beautiful square for the knight. Looking at this pawn, can't be booted away, but also covering the d4 square. Bishop f5 and rook a d1. Now the clock times were something like 40 minutes for Ding and something like 55 minutes for Gukesh. So clock time's starting to even up, but still Gukesh with a time advantage. But I think Ding would be very, very happy with the outcome of the opening. I'll tell you what the problem is. Black's queen on d8. If that queen doesn't find a good square, then the rooks are split and black can be in big trouble. Basically, white is building up to push with d4. Obviously not at the moment, but it won't be long before white can play a move like queen c3 and then potentially d4. And the problem is that that queen won't always have a good square to go to, and it has to keep an eye on that pawn on c7. So this is already quite a difficult position for black. So knight d7 played. So Ding perhaps looking to swing this knight round. Queen d2, excellent move. Keeps an eye on that pawn here. And Gukesh started consuming quite a lot of time here. He thought for 26 minutes over his next move, which was bishop g6. I'm sure he wanted to play knight c5, but now we can see the power of this pawn break. It reminds me of Sicilian positions where black breaks with d5, and often that just liberates black's pieces. In the Kalashnikov, I call this liberation station. And this would be typical. So this didn't happen, but let me just show you what could occur. So after this exchange, you can see that that queen is still a problem on d8. You know, and there are some nasty tactics here. You know, this could be loose. There's potentially rook e5. You know, those pieces are loose. The queen is a big problem here. And after knight c5, d4, knight d3 looks tricky, but actually white can sacrifice an exchange. I mean, it's clear that both players were looking at this from the time that they took with their moves. Knight is attacked when it comes in here. Now, at the moment, white only has a pawn pawn and a knight for the rook, but a huge centre, and when the bishop goes back, queen takes a5. So now it's knight and 2 pawns for the rook, so rough material parity, but white has such domination of the centre that looks very promising for white. So Gukesh, well, he bottled it. He just put the bishop back, but that's a bit of a nothing move. And Ding took the opportunity to break. Once again, there are problems for black after this. For example, after e takes, bishop f4 hits this pawn. And then knight takes. And you can see this knight is attacked. After this, queen c3. And the queen is just stuck on d8. It's a horrible position. White's pieces combine absolutely beautifully. So this is the basic problem with black's position. The queen hasn't found a satisfactory square. The rooks are split. And Ding is able to exploit that with the greater coordination, better coordination of his pieces. So e4 played. Knight g1. Well, e4 is, I mean, it's basically positional capitulation, but Gukesh realized he had to play this because it leaves this center unchallenged. Also gives away the f4 square and blocks the bishop. So not a pleasant move to make. Gukesh, of course, will have realized this, but there was nothing better at this stage. Knight b6. So Gukesh trying to find a square for this knight hopping in here, or, you know, if c5, maybe knight d5. So there's no need to push this pawn. Queen c3 guards this one. Bishop f6, so that's, you know, in the same line as the queen. So it just stepped back. It's all very delicate. And, I mean, knight c2 could have been played, but queen c2 now keeps an eye on that e4 pawn. You know, that little triangulation with the queen seems to lose time, but actually, in the meantime, actually Gukesh can't really do much with black because it's not possible to challenge the center. a4. So trying to claim some squares, but knight e2. Now that this knight bounces back into the game, this is really strong. Bishop g5 and knight f4. And that, a very simple move really, just moving to a good square, leaves black in desperate trouble. So there's a threat to take here if the bishop comes back. Then c5, and if knight d5, you can exchange and take on c7. Absolutely crushing with a knight fork. So Gukesh had to exchange off his dart squared bishop, and now this bishop just rules the dart squares. A terrible threat to take on c7. e3 doesn't make any difference because, in fact, the queen just moves, and I mean, this pawn gets picked up. I mean, there's no real change in the position. So rook c8 played. And now a very careful move. I mean, there are many good moves here, but queen c3, what that does is cover the e5 square so that d5 can be played without allowing that knight to hop into e5, because that square is now covered by queen and bishop. Gukesh now played knight b8. Right. Here's my drink and think moment. So, if you were playing white, how would you play next? What should Ding play in this position? Cheers. Ding played d5, which is just a really powerful thematic move. Charging through the centre. I mean, what a centralised position white has. Funny thing is, he could have just won the exchange with knight a7 because that rook is trapped. And for me, that would have been very fitting, considering that the queen never found a decent square and it left that rook in a terrible situation. Ding said after the game he just didn't see the move. Incredible. Nevertheless, d5 was really powerful. Queen d7, finally the queen moves off the back rank. d6, Ding powering through. Of course, if that's taken, then knight d6 forks the rooks. c5 played. Knight c7. So everything just protected beautifully. The rook attacked, moved to f8. By this stage, players down to around about 8 minutes for Ding, 7 minutes for Gukesh, and they've got 12 moves to make. Well, not horrendous time pressure, but it was noticeable that Gukesh was starting to play instantly. I think he was trying to panic Ding somehow, trying to hustle him. But this is quite an easy position for white to play. Ding took the pawn on e4. And Gukesh played the knight c6, looking to perhaps land the knight on d4. I mean, if he takes here, this doesn't help because white can actually sacrifice a bishop, and that's fatal with mate coming, or winning the queen. Gukesh played knight c6. As I said, he was playing instantly to try and somehow panic Ding. Ding was really cool. He didn't rush it at all. Just put his bishop back on g2, maintaining the two bishops, maintaining control over the centre. Rook d8. Knight d5. Excellent move. So the knight has performed a great function on c7, bounces back here, hits the knight on b6. Knight takes d5. Pawn takes. Now those pawns are protected, and now the knight is dislodged, and it opens up the line for the queen. Knight p8, queen takes c5. So now white is 2 pawns up, and I mean, what a picture of centralization. Absolutely wonderful. As Ding said afterwards, I've got 2 pawns and compensation. Rook c8, queen d4 again, just maintaining that wonderful centralized position, and the rook is able to come down to e7. Queen b5, d7, that pawn marching through. Rook c4, hitting the queen, came back, just supporting the rook. Rook c2. And now the killer move. I mean, there are many ways to win, but bishop d6 was played. Excellent move. And now rook e8 really is fatal because the rook will be attacked. So, for example, if rook takes b2, then rook e8. And yeah, that's just too much. So Gukesh played f6, and it didn't take long. It took seconds for Ding to hack the pawn off on g7, and here Gukesh resigned. Why did he resign? Well, if king takes rook, then bishop takes rook check, king takes bishop, and it's time to get a new queen. And it won't take long before white cruises in to find a checkmate. Wow! What an incredible comeback from Ding. I mean, he played a really perfect game. And this was complex. You know, when Ding was going through the game afterwards, you know, he started to show a lot of variations that were very deep, very complex. And, you know, it was quite clear how much was involved in playing a game which on the surface looks very smooth, but under the water, you know, there's a lot going on. And it was obvious that Ding was making absolutely sure that, you know, the position that Gukesh wasn't able to simplify. And I think that variation right at the start is a very good example of that, where d4 looks like a really tempting move. This endgame at first glance, with all white's pieces very active, looks so promising. But Ding realised that, in fact, there wasn't any way for white to make an advantage here. But that's the kind of thing he was thinking about. And as he said in the press conference, that's why, you know, you have to consume a lot of time. People have been questioning his time management. And if you lose, then you look very foolish. But, you know, when you win, basically, you know, he needed to invest the time to make sure that he got a position that he could play on and press for the advantage. Incredibly impressive. Gukesh said afterwards, game's disappointment. But I have to say, Gukesh was so composed after this loss. You know, you wouldn't particularly know that he lost this game. He's very, very level, very balanced. Ding was asked, you know, what did you do? He said, well, I followed my normal routine, had something to eat, went to sleep a bit earlier. He said, maybe it's the best game I've played in recent times. I'd go along with that. He said, I had a cup of coffee before the game, which gave me more energy. That's good. And his mum said that he'd come back before and that he could do it again. Well done to Ding. So that was game 12. We have game 13 and 14 to go. 2 games to go. And the scores are level again. Just when you thought Ding had collapsed, he comes back. Return of the Ding. See you later. Oh, it's a free day. Rest day tomorrow. 13 and 14 will be played on Wednesday and Thursday. See you then.